Oh, blimey, are we back already? Flipping heck, that was quick. Part two. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Dodgy Git Show 119, aren't we? We're on 119. Yeah, 119. We're just waiting for him to come back. She said fucking 12:05, but we'll see. We'll end up doing till about 1:15 or something like that, I should think, and then go for lunch, if not before. Yeah, as soon as they come back, I shall bring them back into the room, eh? Back into the room. Let's put this up. There we go. You can see that bit. Keep up to date with me. I'm gonna start this one on something to eat. So I'm gonna pop off for something to eat. Welcome to the show again. Thanks for joining me. Just finished the last one 5 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago. Got to break it up, you see. I'm doing these live streams. I'm not recording them and then fannying about with editing them and all that sort of thing. Just doing it straight, yeah? Just doing it straight, like a live thing, a bullseye. Can you imagine doing that? That'd be a right old giggle, wouldn't it, eh? Do a TV show live. Be funny as fuck. All the cock-ups, yeah? No fucking editing, yeah? If you fall over the fucking house cat, fucking hit your face on the fucking couch, that's funny, yeah? The audience are gonna fucking laugh. But yeah, here we are, fucking sat inside, bit gloomy and cold outside again, waiting for the rain to come in later on tonight. Clear day, yeah. But raining tonight again. Yeah, should you wash the car? What's the fucking point? Yeah, raining tonight. Anyway, let's go wash your car. Yeah, it's fucking dry out, so don't do. Eh? If you can, do it. Yeah, if you can do it, do it. Yeah, she taking her time getting back, isn't she? Are you sure she meant 5 past? Yeah. It's the thing with these people, doesn't it? They say this long and then they take like half an hour. Because they came in at 10:30. They've only done what? Fucking not even an hour and a half's fucking chin wag. Yeah. Let's give it an hour and a half. Yeah. She's gone in there. She's earned her 750 quid. Maybe 1250 or maybe 1500 quid, and then yeah, gone off for a poo, ain't she? Yeah, there's a queue though because there's loads of people there, so fuck everybody's trying to fucking squeeze one out whilst everybody's listening to everybody else squeeze one out. Fucking horrific, yeah. Imagine the fucking girls' toilets there. It'd be fucking. Oh, here we go. Hello, all rise, all sit down, all do the okey cokey, turn around, touch the ground. Bagsy not here. Here comes Sunak. Thanks for joining me, folks. It's Hugo Keith, KC, the lead counsel to the inquiry.
Application has to be checked.
Who? We'll check Sunak's ID.
Just some final questions on the first lockdown decision.
There we go.
You referred earlier to the debate about herd immunity and also the advice that the government received.
Herd immunity, Arabia, kids on the other one, like chicken pox, like chicken pox.
Plural.
So chicken pox pies, to me, eh? Everybody gets spots if I put pink cream over yourself for a week. Fucking grim.
About the nature of the debate about herd immunity, the danger of suppression, which might lead to an uncoiled spring, and the issue of the timing of measures, which then led into the wider debate about behavioural fatigue. You'll recall all these debates.
9, 10, oh, fuck it, I can't
What
be
should the
fucking
inquiry
ass
make
Tom.
of those debates? To what extent did they occupy valuable time and bandwidth in the weeks of the 2nd and 9th of March? Do you recall
2nd and 9th
there being a great deal of time spent on debating these somewhat conceptual issues?
You know, I don't precisely. I think I was probably a receiver, as it were, of information on that topic. The Department for Health were the ones who are the lead department presenting the information.
Oh, right.
The delay contain strategy was one that,
Keep
to best of my knowledge, had been signed off by our scientific health advisors. That's what we were told, I think, at Cabinet. So I had no reason to particularly doubt
that was that was a document that was published on the 3rd of March. It had its genesis in a commissioning email from the Secretary of State on the 10th of February. I'm more concerned with the weeks leading up to those
you mean after
the decision to implement the measures of the 12th, 16th, and then the 20th of March.
I don't think the overall strategy changed. I think it always was the strategy, which was to not completely suppress the curve, but to flatten the peak and push it out. I do remember that this concept, I don't have any strong recollections, but I remember the chief science advisor talking about herd immunity in that context. And I think the minutes of one of the meetings I think maybe it is on the 12th, to your point, where I think the minutes say that he said a good outcome being that by September 2020 herd immunity would be reached. So that's the
reference to herd immunity. In fact,
that's in the minutes of that meeting attributed to him. But I think it was just to get the point across that the aim and the goal could not be and should not be to completely suppress the virus. It was about changing the shape of the curve. And all these interventions I saw as our previous conversation at the end of the last session were about doing that so the NHS was not overwhelmed.
There were a number of SAGE meetings and COBRA meetings where the issue of don't go too early, timing is vital, dominated the debate, at least the debate about whether or not measures should be implemented. You were, of course, present at the COBRAs. To what extent do you assess that had the government not received advice, don't go too early, there is a limit to which the population will be able to countenance and to deal with such measures? To what extent did that debate slow down the ultimate decision-making?
Was there that debate there, you reckon? Did they talk about it, or were they all just thinking chicken
this
pox?
Period is that the government acted, I think, almost immediately on the recommendations from SAGE.
But SAGE didn't, with respect to make specific suggestions. It could only recommend that more stringent interventions would be applied, and then they would produce papers showing what the consequences would be of any particular intervention.
But they also advised on timing.
They did, ultimately.
So both on substance and timing. So I think on the 9th of March, from memory, I have to check.
Who's feeding that? Is that Chris again?
They said, look, here are 3 things that we think you're going to need to do, but we don't think you need to implement even the first one until later in the month. And here are 3 things that you definitely don't need to think about now, including banning mass events or closing schools. So that was a meeting I remember vividly. Now, that was on the 9th, I think.
That was the week of the 9th of March.
And then what happened then they came back with timing advice, which on the 12th was more specific, and the timing advice on the 12th said you don't need to implement the first of these until, I think, the 20th, and the other 2 later. Then that all changed on the 16th.
Well, there was a 13th SAGE where they said don't allow a concern about the timing of implementation to delay anything you might wish to do. So there was a change on the 13th in terms of material from SAGE, and the evidence is quite clearly that there were dramatic changes in the approach over that weekend.
I think the 16th is the meeting that I remember, which is where, and I think the imperial modelling had come out at around the same time. SAGE themselves said at that moment in time, and it's recorded in the minutes, that their view had changed just in the past few days.
You try getting dodgy get show live on YouTube without actually, you can't find me, mate. You cannot find me at all.
At around the same time,
well
no
funny,
was a
suppressed like fuck, I'm sure.
And then on the 16th, that's when they said, we need to do these things sooner than we thought, do them now, and I think the Prime Minister announced them that day.
He did. There was a suite of measures on the 16th, and then, of course, decision taken on the 18th to close schools, and then on the 20th, you'll recall vividly the decision that non-essential retail...
Recall vividly, see, he does remember. Remember those things vividly, and other things not at all, eh?
And I don't mean that
in any
pejorative sense. The debate about the potential impact of going too early rather suggests that it was an important issue, and that it would be prone, it would be likely to have had an impact on the decision-making process?
Of course it would have done, right?
I think we were following the advice from the scientists. So I do agree that we were influenced and informed by what they were telling the government to do and when to do it. And
when to do it, see? So who's running the tail wag the dog, isn't it, eh?
Not going too early in their
tails wagging the fucking dog. His fucking eyeballs are like a fucking fishbowl, right? Come on, where's the fucker gone? The on Barbados with a fucking...
showed that there was an emergency,
where the
or at
fuck
least
is
a
he?
debate that had to
like
take
a
place
Rothschild offspring to me.
the fear that the bond market, or I suppose the gilts market, as we would call it, might collapse, or at least a concern as to the extent to which the government might be able to fund itself. Just so that we can get the chronological picture correct, did you go and debate or speak to the Prime Minister on that Thursday, in relation to your concerns about funding, because there had been, or as there was shortly to be, a placing of debt in the marketplace that failed? So there was a real problem on that Thursday.
Yes. Now, I don't
get enough shares in before the weekend, right?
When I was speaking to the Prime Minister on these issues, but you'll have a record of it. But the key moments were I received advice on the 19th.
Thursday.
Yes, and the reason for that was the day before there was a very significant move in gilt rates. So the cost of our borrowing, to put it in ordinary language, and there had been a move across most developed markets, bond markets, but the move in the UK was outsized relative to our peers, and that was obviously concerning. So that was the global investment community starting to take a different view on the UK government's ability to borrow, or the price that we should pay for that, and the cost of our borrowing at that point had tripled.
How did that tie in with the Ukraine war then? Somebody tied that up, yeah?
So that was, and there are some other things that are technical, but led the Treasury and the advice I was getting to tell me that there was the gilt markets were showing some signs of impaired functioning. So that was all. That was what was happening on the 18th and 19th, and then something else happened on the 21st.
No
I don't want to go into
Sherlock.
But would you just confirm that, of course, the government put arrangements into place to ensure additional liquidity in the event they weren't used?
Including the
But the government was on
supermarket
top of the
shelves.
problem, and you raised this problem with the Prime Minister on the Thursday in the context of the decision-making which was then going on as to whether or not London should be locked down first. And you were concerned that in any final decision, the Prime Minister understood that the bond market, the gilt market, was a consideration.
Yes.
Is that a fair?
So I think it's worth, if you don't mind me just spending a minute on it, because I do think it's important for the context of the time, because it was incredibly worrying to me as Chancellor. What happened on the 21st is that we had a failed gilt auction.
Is this the DMO operation?
Yes. What that means is the government, in order to fund itself and pay for all the things that we need, borrows in the markets. And on that day, when we tried to borrow from people, the auction didn't go as planned, and we couldn't raise the money we needed.
Didn't have enough cash in your pocket,
extremely serious and rare event. It had happened once before in the financial crisis, and it unsurprisingly caused enormous anxiety inside the Treasury and with me, because it was a very worrying development.
Because all your money ain't worth as much, right?
The government had to enter into, I think what you were referring to, Mr.
Something
Keith, which
like
is
that.
something called the Ways and Means Facility, which again in ordinary parlance is an overdraft facility at the Bank of England. It's the government saying we're not sure if we're going to be able to borrow the money that we need and fund ourselves, so we will open up essentially an overdraft at the Bank of England. And
getting enough credit card. They got another credit card to pay off the first one.
It happened once before in the crisis, and it's strong evidence of the extreme stress that we were under from a financing perspective. Sorry to explain, but I think it's important for understanding the context that I was operating in, and that's what I would have, over the course of those few days, no doubt have explained to the Prime Minister.
And what did you understand to have been the impact of you telling the Prime Minister about your concerns? So in the context of the debate which was running on, of course, during those days as to the extent to which further measures would need to be imposed, and, of course, ultimately whether there should be a lockdown decision, what impact did your concerns about the gilt or the bond market and the government's ability to fund itself have on that decision-making process? and I ask, and so that you are clear.
Did you rush out into the corridor and tell Boris we're fucked if we
mooted the possibility of locking down London in advance of the rest of the country? And we want to know to what extent that decision was influenced by the concerns about government borrowing.
I think probably a question for the previous Prime Minister, really, because he would have been hearing lots of different things from lots of different...
But you must have expressed a view on it.
Yeah, you must have fucking told him something correct.
I don't recall other than
you don't recall
that we were under, and it was a relevant consideration for him. That's why he had an impossible job in many ways to balance all these
you had an impossible... You told him he had an impossible job.
I recollect that meeting, and I recollect that the priority intervention that had been recommended, suggested by Sage, was to close schools.
Oh, right. So it's a recommendation.
On the same day as the meeting, on the 18th, not just in London, but nationally.
Yes.
So in terms of the substantive...
Overrid your worry of cash,
the one in the papers that it says would be most effective was closing schools. That was announced the same day by the Prime Minister, acted on.
What debate did you have with the Prime Minister about whether or not locking London was an advisable step to take in light of your concerns about the gilt market?
I don't recall a specific meeting or conversation about those two things. I think more generally, as I've said, my job was to provide him with best economic evidence, advice, analysis, and it was a relevant consideration for him that there was this situation in the gilt market. It was right that he was aware of that. And of course, with regard to London, we took the advice of Sage and closed schools, not just in London, but across the entire country on the same day that that advice came to the committee.
Yes, the decision was then announced on the 18th to take effect from the 20th.
On the 20th, that's right.
In your statement, so that we can understand, and it's a matter of obviously huge public interest, we can understand the nature of the impact of the lockdown decision. Have you set out, and we'll have your statement at page 53, at paragraphs 182 to 187, the scale of the economic and social impact of the pandemic restrictions? Mr. Sunak, I'm going to respectfully ask you to try to keep your answers as concise as you can. Perhaps you might just agree with the following proposition. Do you set out in those paragraphs the damage that was done in terms of the impact on GDP, the damage on the economy, the government's borrowing, the costs, of course, the fiscal impact, and the scarring, that is to say, the long-term damage that was done to the economy through alterations in labour supply and the like? So you've attempted to set out in very broad terms what the lockdown decision did.
Yes, my witness statement contains a summary of the various economic impacts, as you highlighted. Biggest fall in GDP was predicted in hundreds of years, borrowing reaching World War II levels, the impact that would have obviously on the labour market, unemployment, and tax levels, which obviously we're grappling with today. Economic scarring is the long-term impact on the economy from things that happen in the short term. Again, I won't go over it in great detail, but I think it's clear that as a result of what was happening, that the economy was being impacted, jobs would be impacted, which is crucial for people's livelihoods, businesses would be impaired, and because of the borrowing that was necessary, that would have an impact on future tax levels. In summary, those are high level. I'm happy to elaborate if you need, but they're contained in my witness statement.
So just to reassure you and others, I don't just take into account your oral evidence, but I do, before reaching any conclusions, take into account everything you've said in writing. So don't worry, it'll all be considered.
And to be plain, I've asked you because it's important that the public understand that you have attempted to set out in your witness statement some of the overarching consequences of the major first lockdown decision.
If I might, Mr. Keith, people can see it. I think it's important, and this is always tricky in public policy, is many of these impacts are not felt immediately. They're felt over time, and that is always a tough thing to deal with when you're communicating, but as it turned out, we were able to borrow what we needed to fund the pandemic response. The impact of having to pay it back only comes well after the fact, when everyone everyone forgets why it was necessary, and now everyone is grappling with the consequences. I am grappling with the consequences of that, as we have a historically high, a tax burden that is higher than I would like. That is a direct consequence of the support that was provided during the pandemic, and then later
historically
on.
High
Things are often hard to get across, but they're all contained in the statement.
I bet Keir still can't come out with shit apart from slagging him off about stuff. Yeah, he still ain't going to come out with nothing new, so I wouldn't worry about fucking Keir. He's a fucking penis.
Following the lockdown in March and April 2020, Mr. Sunak. The first is
fucking more stupid than saying shit like that.
HMT
Funny as fuck.
Expressed concern that there'd been over-compliance with the government's stay-at-home messaging during the first lockdown. Essentially,
paranoia, grow the anxiety, grow the
you were
anxiety.
concerned, and your
Make
department was concerned that the public hadn't understood sufficiently clearly from the government's communications that they should go to work
off the cash.
Only if they could not work from home, and that the messaging perhaps had the nuance of that position had been lost in the overall messaging, stay at home to help us save lives. What did
everybody gave up giving a shit, didn't they? That's what it was.
Was there any means open
everybody
to try to
up
change the
giving a
messaging or
shit.
to try to ensure that
Just said, nah, fuck
people
it,
did go
bollocks.
to work where they
Yeah,
permissibly
that's
and
what
legally
people
could
said
do
in the
so?
end. They're sick of fucking being told,
You're
go
right in
there, do
summarising
this,
the
do
situation.
that.
The
Fucking
best
bend
example of
over.
it
Yeah?
is in the
Give me
construction industry,
more money.
which, because it
Yeah,
was by
now
nature
everybody's
outdoors,
fucking
and we've
resisting.
seen what had happened in
Big
other European
time.
countries, more activity was able to be continued in Europe than was the case in the UK. And so that was a good example of the messaging being slightly lost. I don't think there was anything that we could do about it, particularly. It was a relevant point when we came to the exit roadmap in the May plan and trying to get that messaging right. And because the scientific advice and the modelling was predicated on an amount of people who are working from home and amount of people who are at work, and what ended up happening is those assumptions were essentially undershot, and fewer people were out at work than had been anticipated.
Indeed.
Everybody fucking didn't bother going back, right?
Answers,
All the recruitment agencies shut down and the contract fucking voided and the companies they had them all closed.
583.
The structure wasn't there and you couldn't build it back up again because it was fat.
To various recipients.
That's what happened. Hey, you rodged it, didn't you? You fucking screwed it right in the fucking hole.
About the recovery plan.
All fucked it in the shit.
The debate about coming out of the lockdown.
Fucked up.
The email, it says the Chancellor is considering
the fucking email. Look, so much fucking crap in it. You can't read it.
Out to the discussion in the meeting this afternoon, and then
vague, fluffy fluff,
references to
vague,
your
vague
position
fluff.
in relation to the various issues which are being debated within the Treasury. How difficult it is to argue that the MPI should be lifted while the number of cases and deaths is still rising, but that you are broadly supportive of the strategy that encourages return behaviour back to the economy. Then there's a reference to economic groups starting to model, and your wish that you have very clearly in mind the exact timetable of what advice on modelling has been given, and then a reference to the timing of any decision. If you could go forward, please, to page 4, we will see this, specifically following up on NPI Commission, Non-Pharmaceutical Intervention Commission. I know you're already working on a paper updating the Chancellor on the economic impact of NPIs. There's going to be a wider cabinet discussion. And then this at 3B, Prime Minister. I propose the following as our next step: a paper that we can share with the Prime Minister ahead of the bilateral, an opportunity for the Chancellor to set out his views and the economic analysis of the Prime Minister without it being watered down by the Cabinet Office process. Do you know what that is a reference to, the watered down by the Cabinet Office process? Because plainly, you as the Chancellor are absolutely entitled, you suggested it yourself, perhaps constitutionally obligated to bring the economic angle to bear in front of the Prime Minister.
Yep.
Without it being watered down by any other part of government. So what is that reference to, do you think?
Obviously, I didn't write the email.
It wasn't me.
To comment. And if you flick back to the earlier bit of the email, I think, actually, as you can see from that, it clearly mentions a Cabinet Office process.
Yes.
Which is right and appropriate, but also, even when it talks about modelling on sectors, to bring that together with CMO thinking on the health impacts. I think even in that email you can see, as I said, I didn't write it, so I'm not sure entirely what it's referring to, but it's clear that there is a Cabinet Office process that we are feeding into, CMOs feeding in, and that's the right way for the Prime Minister to receive.
There is no suggestion but that there shouldn't be a process. There has to be a process. The Cabinet Office will synthesise to some extent what is contributed by other government departments. But these are the most senior officials in your department talking about your position and your thoughts and what should be done in advance of a bilateral. And it refers to a concern that your voice might be watered down by the Cabinet Office. And therefore that must have been something of which you were aware, if only in
must have been right.
Terms.
I think, as I said previously, I never felt that I didn't have an opportunity to
get in your statement
what I wanted to the Prime Minister. And again, I didn't write the email. I'm not sure how officials may have felt in their conversations with other departments or the Cabinet Office. I generally thought we had good constructive relations, and for my part, I felt I always had the opportunity to feed into the Prime Minister's thinking.
Right. A second noteworthy debate was taking place before we look at the detail of the roadmap. You expressed concern in May, in fact at a 9:15 meeting on the 14th of May, that international polling had suggested that the British people were more fearful of the virus than other countries. And in the Spectator article to which
got all the fucking hens in the hen house here all fucking panic and start washing frozen peas, right?
You say this,
yeah.
It's quoted. In every brief,
fucking irrational behaviour, fucking not eating the right food, not sleeping properly, fucking alcoholics, or fucking on HRT or antidepressants, right? Or just a drug addict. Yeah.
Again, from an economic perspective, we are a consumption-driven economy.
Yeah, really.
And therefore people's jobs and livelihoods and our ability to pay for public service is a function of consumption being strong. And if you have a situation like this where we've actively discouraged or shut down consumption sectors from operating,
there you go.
Once they reopen, it was a point of concern for me and for anyone thinking about the economy and those jobs as to the pace of return, of people returning to normal activity.
We realise we don't need all this
because
shit.
if they didn't, then that would have significant implications for many people.
We were living with too much shit.
Of the economy, and this is a really important
desired too much
that were
crap
most impacted
material
by
rubbish.
Consumption sectors, hospitality,
leisure,
tourism, retail, disproportionately employed people who were the most vulnerable in society. Those on the lowest incomes, people coming off welfare, women, ethnic minorities, those working part-time. So those jobs, I think, as a matter of social justice, were particularly important to try and safeguard. And the polling was clear. I can't remember the exact polling firm, but there was international polling, Ipsos, that demonstrated there seemed to be, or there was, a much greater reticence for people in the UK to want to return back to all those activities, even once things had been reopened, and that would have genuine impacts on people's lives and their jobs, and and everything else that we'd want to do as a country. So, but that was their concern.
The clock is ticking. I'm going to ask you to try to just be a little bit more concise, if you wouldn't mind, Prime Minister. On the subject of the obvious understanding of the needs of those in part-time work, the vulnerable, the young, female employees, members of the black
since this, look what's happened with all the drivers and deliveries,
Your statement makes it plain.
And the politics behind that,
if not at the forefront, certainly a major part of the
inside or outside IR35
throughout the pandemic was the need to ensure that their interests were not forgotten, and that as much should be done as possible and ought to be done as possible in terms of trying to get the consumer sector back to life. to safeguard their position. We'll just have a quick look where you've summarised the position is your statement 232069.
Shops, didn't we? You fucking plank.
The interventions are at.
They're so slow, really, isn't it? It is slow as fuck. It's like fucking nod off.
So it's not 232069.
Jesus Christ.
Page 26.
Yeah, okay. He wrote what? On what? Yeah. Get on with it.
In briefings and papers that were circulated before meetings, there was often reference to a consideration of the equalities impact. You received equality impact assessments in relation to HMT policies, and then if we scroll back out...
Just before you go in a meeting, somebody who come into the meeting hands you a fuckload of fucking reading to do.
That less well-off households were particularly vulnerable to the economic shock. How could you not, of course, be aware? And consideration was therefore...
It's a document of the fucking obvious, right?
...groups in your economic decision-making. So that's clear. I think in paragraph 83, you also refer to long COVID.
Which is what exactly?
What time long COVID presented itself?
What is that? I've not. Nobody's really explained it to me properly yet.
I don't specifically. I recall in the May plan having a conversation with the CMO about including in that document consideration of other health impacts
screen, bruv.
beyond the immediate COVID impacts, and I think there's some language in the May plan that talks about the various other health impacts at that point. It's something I was keen to stress that was a consequence of all of this that we should understand. I don't remember specifically.
I don't remember again. There's lots that don't remember, innit? Fucking hell. Can't really rely on him to remember much, can you?
Hospitality sectors could be brought back to life as soon as reasonably possible. The Treasury pushed, indeed, for the sector to be opened ahead of schools. That was the original position of HMT, was it?
I think if I recall
it wasn't ultimately what happened, but I think that was the Exchequer's position.
If I recall it correctly, when I was having these deliberations or participating in them in May, there's a letter I sent to the Prime Minister that contains it. Non-essential retail, I think you'll have the exhibit that may be helpful. I talk about non-essential retail because of the economic, the jobs, there are millions of jobs, and particularly the type of people in those jobs. But also, as we later discovered, and was my sense during, Sage themselves later said that non-essential retail had a very minimal impact on R. That was what all the evidence concluded, that it was very minimal impact on R. And now, with regard to schools, I've said in that May thing, they should be opened, particularly the early years.
Is that true?
Alongside or immediately after non-essential retail and before hospitality, because I care very much about the impact on children and their educational attainment and development, and that letter talks about those things. So retail because of the jobs and because it had minimal impact. Immediately alongside that, particularly the early years education of schools and nurseries, and it was only after that hospitality. So that was the sequencing in the letter I wrote in May.
If we have 236585, it's an email from your Principal Private Secretary to various recipients, and on the first page there is a reference to the Chancellor focusing in, perhaps it's on page 2, yes, the second bullet point. Therefore, need hospitality open in the summer, July, and to, here's this, and to stage things, this means open sectors now, schools early June, and non-essential between the two in mid-May. So suddenly at the beginning of May, and this is dated, I think, the 4th of May, the proposal from the Treasury is we've got to get hospitality particularly non-essential, open, and then schools will follow. And there's another letter, an email, 232085, paragraph 17 on page 2. This is your letter delivering our roadmap dated May. Paragraph 17. We must then continue with our plan to return early years reception in years 1 and 6 to school. That is continuing after the opening of non-essential retail. Can you recall why how the final position was reached, the order of play in which schools non-essential retail opened. Do you recall how that debate was resolved?
No, not particularly. I think you said previously, Ms. Keith, that hospitality was before schools, which is, as you said there, it's not. It was retail and education pretty much together, one after another, and hospitality later.
All right.
That was the position that was reached. Yes.
But that was also what that email said.
Right.
The one that you had previously popped up also had hospitality in July and schools.
See, they're only picking a bit out of the whole thread, right? It's a whole backwards and forwards thread of the email, and they're only picking a piece out of it, right?
She says open sectors now, then schools early June, and non-essential between the two. So open sectors now, then non-essential, then schools. But
it says hospitality thereafter. It says hospitality. I don't have it in front of me, but it had hospitality.
Let's have a look.
July
236585.
On my reading of it, if you look at the months, I don't think between the two makes sense.
Well,
I think if you have the
there you go. She's pointing something important out there.
I think it said
complete purposeful fuck up.
Need hospitality open in summer brackets July.
This means open sectors now, schools early June, and non-essential between the two mid-May. So non-essential is coming in before schools.
Yes, just a couple of weeks. But I think what you said, that hospitality was also coming in. I just want to reiterate that was never the
That was
case.
backwards to what he just said then. Yes.
It was retail and schools.
This was your policy, Prime Minister.
He fucked up, right? Yes, you fucked up.
The point was to do retail and schools a couple of weeks apart in
he
May,
fucked
June.
up, so he's been
Hospitality
caught.
was always summer because it was the last thing. Retail because, as you see from the letter that you had up in May, the jobs and the people
now he's trying to
employed in those
fucking
jobs again.
explain his fuck up. No, mate.
In retail on lower incomes, and actually those jobs therefore have I think a broader social purpose or benefit as well as the job itself.
He fucked up, right?
And in schools, as far as I remember it, again, not my.
You can't remember very much, pal. Fucking hell.
A real concern that it would be very difficult
I'm sure
to
there
get
was a
schools to come
concern,
back.
yeah.
And I would imagine you've taken evidence on that point, but my
Yes.
recollection was that there was quite a lot of resistance from the sector
Oh,
about schools coming back. I think there was parents
Doesn't
were
cover up the fact you
also
thought it happened
concerned,
after when
and
it
there was an
happened
issue
before.
that many school teachers were themselves either isolating or impacted, and actually it would be very difficult to have schools open in full.
All right, so all that was part of the mix.
That was part of the mix.
I've suggested to you that this wasn't exactly how it panned out, but it was quite clear that consideration was given to these various competing factors and reasons why schools could only be open when they were.
Again, a question probably for the Education Secretary and the Prime Minister. I'd say from an economic perspective, or the only input the Treasury would have into that deliberation or the Cabinet Office would be the labour market impact. And that's why, from a purely economic perspective, again, it would be the Education Secretary who would talk about children's attainment, although I cared very much about that, as you can see from the letter I sent, and it's there because I've long stand had concerns about that. But from an analytical perspective, what the Treasury could do is explain, I mean, unsurprisingly, if you open early years and children and primary school children, that it has a disproportionate benefit on the labour market because it means their parents can return to work in a way that you don't necessarily get that benefit from older students. But
all right.
So he's totally distracted from the fact he fucked up with getting the whole thing back to front and in the wrong order.
Expressed to a COVID-S.
Okay, Sunak, carry on.
You're concerned that unless the economy was reopened at perhaps a somewhat faster speed.
What a fucking confusing fucking pickle we're in, eh?
Cabinet ministers were.
Yeah, what a confusing pickle everybody's in.
We would be at risk of placing the United Kingdom at a competitive disadvantage. And you referred to international comparative data, in essence, how other European countries were showing, you said, how reopening the economy can be done. Can we just look very briefly at the issue of comparative data? Did the Treasury, throughout the whole
it's just data,
crisis,
sheets of paper
repeatedly,
nobody's reading
what other countries
all,
were doing, what their data was demonstrating, what ultimate decisions they were taking in light of their own particular positions, and was that something that was at the forefront of the debate when these arguments came to be ventilated in front of the Prime Minister?
I think it's probably too much to say it was at the forefront, but certainly right to say it was another piece of information that was helpful and worth taking into account. Yes.
All right. On the 28th of April, so again around this time, you had a bilateral with the Prime Minister, 236584.
What's that? What's the bilateral?
Again,
it's just a meeting, isn't it? You don't know if he's going to this meeting or that meeting or talking to him in the hallway.
On Tuesday, the subject matter is PM bilateral on Tuesday.
Oh, PM bilateral, what the fuck is that?
On the first page, there is a reference to the Prime Minister's instinct, we can see there in the first bullet point, being that we might have overdone lockdown, telling that no other countries closed construction, turned to our international slide, but said interesting that there are new opportunities coming out of this and online is growing. And he also says a little later down the page, a little further down the page, that the sooner gets this open, the better, but then refers to the risk of another exponential increase. And I think he says, overall, he's agitated that he didn't have a plan. Yes. To what extent in these early days of the roadmap, Mrs. Sunak, what was the Prime Minister concerned as to how he would equate the imperative of making sure that there be no unnecessary risk in growth in prevalence and the need to get the economy back going? It must have been a source of perpetual anxiety, and you had these debates with him as to how he should resolve.
Like Gove said, right? And Boris, continual. What's he going to say?
Probably better addressed to him, but we recapped previously the economic impacts. By this point, we had a much greater sense of what they were because we were. I don't see the date of this.
Answer the question, you can't.
May or
It's going to come up with anything apart from
the government's independent forecaster, the OBR, had published their reference scenario, I think perhaps a week, 10 days before this, so that would be in the public domain. It was pretty stark. I won't recap it all again, but that was then out there, and we were collecting real-time data on the number of people who were furloughed, the businesses that were shut, etc., etc. So it would be unsurprising if that wasn't something that he was considering.
There is an email from, again, the same Elizabeth Perelman on the 21st of May, 232168. This is an email which follows yet another meeting with the Prime Minister, in which she says, I think probably on page 2.
Just for the record, Nigel Farage comes back at 7 p.m. just as the Rwanda statements read out.
Gold standard economic advice to the Prime Minister, Chancellor. But perhaps there might be an element of marking one's own homework there. But the Chancellor has not eloquently and authentically put these points across. So there can be no question but that you've eloquently and authentically put these points across. But once again, he was a lone voice, and it was a tricky meeting where sense was they were trying to appease
bit of a sticky wicket.
Do you recall what that is a reference to?
No.
It's barbecue.
Was it, do you think, a reference to the fact that in this particular meeting you had argued for an opening up of the economy, but the majority of the room had expressed its combined view that the risk of opening up too fast would have terrible consequences further down the road? Was that not the debate that was going on at the time?
I can't comment on the particular meeting because I don't recall it. In general, I was making the points at this time about the economic impact, what was happening internationally, the fact that we were investing in test and trace and the Joint Biosecurity Centre as new institutions that would allow us to manage an exit. And I was also concerned at this point in time about the data that we were receiving on transmission and admissions. And I think it was exactly around this time that it was clear that we had probably been overestimating R. That's something that SAGE themselves acknowledged a bit later. And also the issue of nosocomial transmission, where a large amount of the transmission that was happening not in sectors of the economy that were open or closed, but in hospitals or care homes, which requires a slightly obviously different response. Those weren't well understood issues earlier on, but it was clear that they were starting to become issues. So those were the types of conversations that I was having at that moment in time.
Do you recall in June how an HMT official who attended SAGE provided a readout which referred to the fact that the CMO, Professor Sir Chris Whitty, and the government's chief scientific advisor, Professor Sir Patrick Vallance, began to warn that the package of measures for reopening, in particular the beginning of July, was at the riskier end of the spectrum and therefore had the potential to increase R above 1. Do you recall that warning being relayed to you, or to the Treasury, at the end of June?
You know, I don't. What I do recall, though, perhaps should have started with this, is this May plan. I'd say two things about it. One, that it was conditional, so there were various tests that were set out to unlock each stage, and indeed it was delayed at one point, which shows, I think, the flexibility, decision-making and responsiveness to the health concerns.
Yes, step 2 was delayed from the 1st to the 15th of June.
That's right. But I think it demonstrates the process working and the conditions working. And the second, and perhaps the most important thing to say, is that the May plan was developed with scientific and epidemiological input. And it was modelled at SAGE in early May. I remember the CMO, and again, this is recorded in the minutes of the COVID strategy meeting at the time, saying that this package of measures should not push R above 1. That was my strong.
What date was that?
That was in the COVID strategy meeting, I think, I haven't got the exact date in front of me, in May. I'm happy to send it. It's in my witness statement.
Now, the May the 4th one
Mr. Sunak,
was the May the 4th statement, the result of that.
Epidemiological evidence from SAGE and from the CMO and the GCSA was that the measures which had been agreed, first proposed and then agreed, were at the riskier end of the spectrum. And I'm specifically asking you about the stage which had been reached by then, late June, which was step 3. Were you not aware that the scientists were beginning to question the speed at which the roadmap was operating? Do you recall that being brought to your attention?
No. I think they always thought that from the beginning. I think they thought it was consistent with R not being above 1, but I think from the beginning they thought it was, at that end of the spectrum, it was closer to 1 than it was to 0.1, if I could put it that way. But they were involved and modelled the package of measures that was announced in May. I think that's important.
Well, no, they didn't. They didn't model the package necessarily. They gave advice through SAGE on what the consequences would be of the package. And then it was for the government, the Prime Minister in particular,
it's all on SAGE modelling, see? All SAGE, right?
But I thought
and it wasn't even, you can see the model, it's if you don't do this, that's gonna happen, or that'll happen, or that'll happen. Distracted again. Yeah,
the meeting, I think,
distracted
on the 6th,
to the response rather than the point.
Broadly content.
Yeah?
That was, I think, in relation to the broad roadmap, which was itself dated the 13th of May, and step 1, which of course was the first step, the second step, which was 15th of June, and the third step, of course, came later. And by the end of June, the 23rd of June, the CMO and the GCSA were warning that the package of measures was at the riskier end of the spectrum, with the potential to increase R above 1. Shall we have a look at 232181?
232181.
It's a readout of SAGE from your principal private secretary.
From his private secretary.
Vallance noted the heavy trailing in the press of the measures the government has now announced it will relax. He and Whitty had made clear to the policymakers that this package was at the riskier end of the spectrum, with the potential to increase R above 1, and that they needed to be prepared to reimpose measures if necessary. Noted also, this package reduces the space for doing other things, like bringing schools back in September. If schools are to return, policymakers may have to reimpose restrictions in other places like retail. The government had obviously made the various decisions that it made in relation to the 3 steps in the roadmap. But by the end of June, the Treasury was, of course, considering the voucher scheme that became Eat Out to Help Out. Was that not something that was being contemplated at the end of June, with a view to its implementation in August?
Yes, I mean, I don't recall seeing that email.
I don't remember. Again, I don't remember. Don't remember.
Was developed and hadn't changed, and I strongly recall it being modelled in terms of the impact on R, and people broadly being comfortable that it did just about keep things at that level. And I think the other thing, as I said, that was relevant consideration at this time was that in June, probably actually 3 days before this email, the SAGE minutes record that there had been errors that meant that for some time they had been overestimating the rate of transmission, making it look artificially high.
Well, so there was an issue about hospital data, was there not?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the SAGE minutes from the 20th of June, it's very clear that SAGE, because there were errors in the data collection, so it meant that all the numbers we were working with were artificially high.
Yeah,
there was also a
sense of compounded fucking layers of bullshit, right?
If you just bear with me.
Of course.
Compounded layers of bullshit.
In the middle of the page, there's a bullet point which refers to that very issue. The NHS have looked into the serious concerns raised by the modellers about the hospital admissions data and claim it's causing no more than a 5% error in that data stream. So there was a debate about the significance of the error and what its impact was, but the NHS appeared to say there was no more than a 5% error. But be that as it may, whatever the position was on the data,
can you imagine if engineers used 5% error as a tolerance?
The CMO and the GCSE were raising a general alarm at the end of June.
Good luck driving out, flying out, fucking sailing out,
and the package which had already been agreed was itself already at the riskier end of the spectrum.
That
to what extent did HMT understand at the end of June that whatever it proposed to do thereafter came with significant risk?
That's just not my recollection of it. I mean, my recollection was that we went over a set of things that could be done.
You want to remember in a different
it was conditional
way, right?
It was delayed at one stage on the advice from the scientists. So I think that shows that the process was working.
Mr. Whitty.
I think there were genuine issues about the robustness of the data, but also where the R was coming from, because there was this issue about nosocomial transmission that was definitely not properly understood at the time, potentially accounting for up to a quarter of the transmission, which obviously requires a very different response. But also, I think analysis has been done subsequent to this that I wasn't aware of at the time, from I think professors of medicine and economics at Imperial and Manchester, that applied a Quayle analysis to the first lockdown and its duration, and their Quayle analysis, which you'll be familiar with as a tool of health, public health analysis, suggested that the lockdown in its severity and duration is likely to have generated costs that are greater than the likely benefit. Well, so I think I wasn't aware of that at the time.
I'm so sorry. I don't want to get into quality life assurance models. Is it your position as the Chancellor?
What a fucking way to run a fucking boat, eh?
That the government's chief advisors, epidemiological public health advisors, were making clear that the existing package was already at the riskier end of the spectrum, and therefore that going forward, real care would have to be taken to ensure that that prevalence and the R rate going above 1 did not eventuate.
I was always clear that schools was something they viewed as a big risk factor, which I think is alluded to in that email.
Did you know that the package in place was at the riskier end of the spectrum epidemiologically?
I don't precisely remember that, but I do remember it was modelled and designed to keep R at or below 1.
All right.
And as I said, I'm sure it was closer to 1 than it was to 0.1.
What's that got to do with anything?
Remember, as we've discussed in the first session,
it's got nothing to do with it.
Into account a whole range of considerations, and the objective strategy here was not to completely suppress the virus. It was to make sure that the NHS was not overwhelmed. That is consistent with a range of R ratios.
The point is well made. Ultimately, the Prime Minister has to make the final decision, and he'll take into account the risk. He'll take into account the economic and fiscal consequences. But the point here is that this demonstrates that the Treasury, because this is your principal private secretary, were told, rightly and responsibly, that there were alarm bells ringing about the package already in place. And therefore the Treasury could not have been unaware that whatever it proposed in the public interest economically going forward came with risks. I mean, there is no way which any responsible Treasury could consider implementing plans without having at least half an eye on the epidemiological consequences. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been writing to you in this term.
Exactly.
I didn't.
So you were aware of it.
And you didn't see it.
You didn't see the email. Oh no!
I would have done, right? I would have been here and there on things that I needed to know, but I definitely didn't see the emails on a regular basis. That's
questions like risk.
Fuck! Oh, I didn't see the email. Fuck me! What a crock of fucking pony!
Hospitalisation and death were obviously issues which were brought to your attention.
Yes, and my strong recollection is that the set of measures that were announced in the May plan was one which the scientists had fedded on, had modelled, and was consistent with R being at or below 1. And on their advice, one step of that plan was delayed for, I think, a fortnight in June. And there were measures that were continued with after this email, which rather suggests that there wasn't a significant concern raised, because when they had raised a concern previous to this, the government acted on it with regard to delaying.
See, this is where we're fucking at, where we're at, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dodgy Git Show with fucking Richie fucking Sunak, you fucking Dodgy Git.
That's all I can.
I'm Dodgy Git, he's Richie Sunak, and he is a fucking oily fucker. He's oiled to fucking fuck his.
Your statement refers to the issue of PPE. Prime Minister, that is, as you know, a matter for a later hearing, but you address the issue of PPE from a high-level Treasury perspective. Is this a fair summary of the position insofar as the...
See, if you didn't fucking think it was serious, why did you order so many?
Involvement in the issue of PPE commenced right at the beginning. It commenced in March 2020, is that right?
Back in a minute. Try and make yourself another jar of fucking go-go.
And
whilst, hang on, I've got to do that thing.
Although at the beginning the Treasury was obligated to approve individual PPE contracts at the request of the DHSC, the Treasury agreed to depart from the usual process and put into place a flexible spending control envelope. So the DHSC were given an envelope within which they could spend and within which they could enter into PPE contracts without having to go to the Treasury or the Chief Secretary to the Treasury or you. And that funding envelope started, I think, at £100 million on the 25th of March, but by the 11th of April, it was £1 billion. Is that a fair summary of the envelope position?
Yes, it's probably worth me expanding on it.
Well, only if you think that we'd be greatly assisted by it, given that there is another module looking at it, but it may or may not be the case. You'll have to give evidence in that module, and I'm trying to cover the possibility you might not, Mr. Sunak, by asking you just to agree with my general proposition now.
I think that the first thing to say is I wasn't involved in it day to day because it was led by the Chief Secretary.
Yes.
Generally, we aim to move at pace given the urgency of the requirements, and as you suggested accurately, we put in place a new way of doing it so that rather than individual contracts being agreed, as would be normal with the scrutiny that would come from that, HMT gave to the Department of Health a budget that it could spend. It raised that budget, I think, 5 different times. It ended up being close to £14 billion in the end, so that there would be no blocks and there would be speed of approval so that PPE could get to the people who needed it. And the last thing to say was no issues were ever substantively raised with me about blocks in that process or delays at all, including, I think we had a meeting in April on the PPE plan, and there's no minutes or anything recorded of there being any issues about that. I think it worked very well from our ability to give Department of Health the cover it needed and the funding it needed to buy the PPE that it wanted.
The approval process was amended at great speed, very rapidly.
Yes.
And lastly, the Treasury was properly concerned in the process as to what sort of checks and balances should be put into place, and that was something then that was negotiated between yourself and the DHSC. So you might suggest, well, these are the sorts of conditions which you need to apply when you enter into individual PP contracts. So you kept a controlling hand on the overarching system of checks and balances whilst not being concerned with the individual deals.
Yes, but those overarching conditions were deliberately flexible.
And they changed over time.
So that there could be no issue with Department of Health procuring the PPE that it wanted at the speed that it wanted. And as I said, led primarily by the CST, but there was a deliberate change to the normal processes to enable pace at the expense of the same normal
wouldn't
amount
have implemented those
that would go into
expenses if you didn't think it was a problem, right?
I've been asked to take a
there we go.
I'm very sorry.
Sorry, lunch break.
Short lunch break.
So I shall return at 5 to 2.
5 to 2, everybody. There we go. Oh, where am I? I need to come up. There we go. I'm here. I'm there. There I am. Hello, everyone. I'm Dodgy Git. Yeah. Thanks for joining me. That was quite fun, wasn't it, eh? Watch that fucking... Must be lunchtime. Did you hear that? That was my belly, eh? Excuse me. Yeah, wow, there you go. Fucking Sunak on the fucking stand. I don't think he did very well. He's not very convincing, and he's not very good at answering questions straight, is he? He wants to bring a load of other subject matter into it. It's quite fucking humorous. Yeah, but you can tell they're all at it. They're all trying to say it's everybody else's fault. And like that, he didn't know what fucking meeting he was going to or if he was in the fucking corridor. And he didn't know if what he was saying in the corridor affected any decision making by, let's say, anybody that came out of one meeting after a decision had been agreed. Yeah? So you can always wait till the decision's been agreed and then drop a fucking clanger on them that they haven't thought about. And they fucking panic and go, shit. And then change their fucking mind in the next meeting they walk into. And the people that had just been in the one in the meeting before go, hang on a minute, Boris, you fucking said this. So it's all a bit fucking, it's all coming out, innit? Hey? All coming out in a wash. Yeah, if you haven't had a wash yet today, go and have a fucking bath. I'm going to go and try and assemble myself something to fucking satisfy my growling stomach. Yeah? And, yeah, I'll see you at 5 to 2, yeah? Don't forget, click the bell, and then you get a notification when I'm back live. I might come back a bit early, 5-10 minutes early, get the show kicking off, talk about a few other little things I got jotted down here for my live shows. And, yeah, please like if you like the content, like the way we're doing it, like we have my videos and shorts. They're out there to see as well. Lots of videos. I'm not getting many views on my videos. Video tab there on my channel, and I've got my live streams and I've got my shorts. So please, yeah, go in the interlude here. We got we'll have a bit of a lunch break, and I'll catch you back here. But yeah, if you're a bit bored, go and watch the other videos. I'll catch you back here in 45 minutes, eh? Yeah, 45 minutes. I'm Dodgy Git. This has been Dodgy Git Show 119, I think. I'm starting to lose track of the numbers. 119. Yeah, I'm sharing my love with you. Share the love around the people around you this lunchtime or whatever time it is, wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Much love to you. Peace be with you.